I think that ability to take a step back and just think about how you want to spend your time going forward is worth a lot. You know, being on the Cerner board with you is certainly very different than being a small startup private company board member. Well, I think there are a couple things I've learned from previous acquisitions. One is that there's no substitute for clarity. You've got to make sure that you're not talking past each other.
William Zollars joined us on the Gary Bisbee Show for a focused interview. William is the former chairman, president, and CEO of YRC Worldwide. He also serves on the board of directors for several organizations, including Cerner Corporation and the U.S. Postal Service.
So I think your experience working within teams and leading teams is also a really important attribute to have for any director.
This short-form conversation explores the leadership insights we can gain from his board memberships and reviews what Bill is doing in retirement. So let's hear it from him.
Well, good afternoon, Bill, and welcome.
Thanks, Gary.
We're pleased to have you at this microphone. You know, you've handled retirement, if I can use that word, as well as or better than anyone I know. How did you prepare for retirement, Bill?
Well, I guess the short answer, Gary, is I didn't. You know, you always think that retirement is kind of on the horizon, but it's a little bit like a mirage, and the closer you get to it, the more it tends to move away. So I really didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. My day job kept me pretty busy, but in a way, I think that's an advantage. I think you need to kind of deal with the end of your day job as it occurs, and fortunately for me, I think things went pretty well in the transition.
So what have you learned so far that you might not have been expecting?
Well, I found out, Gary, that my golf game wasn't going to get better. I assumed it would get better when I retired, and in fact, it didn't. So that turned me in a different direction because I realized that I wasn't going to be spending time on the PGA Tour, so I had to find some other things to do. Other than that, I think, you know, as a former CEO, one of the things you get used to is looking at numbers every morning. People bring you numbers to look at, and then all of a sudden, after you retire, nobody brings you numbers. And it's a little bit disconcerting when that happens because you have spent most of your life kind of looking at numbers and trying to do the things you're doing well better and trying to fix the things that aren't going well. So that's the biggest change that I ran into, and that in addition to the fact that you lose your assistant, which probably was even more important.
So looking back on it, what would you say are the keys to a successful retirement, Bill?
I'm not exactly sure I've been successful, but I can tell you a couple of things I think to keep in mind for anybody that's approaching that stage in the transition. One is not to do anything for about 6 months. What tends to happen, I think, to most people when they're used to working as hard as most of us do, is they tend to feel like they should be doing something kind of right away after they retire. And I think if you fall into that trap, you have a tendency to jump at the first thing that looks good to you, and then maybe have second thoughts down the road. The kind of advice I've given to most people that are approaching retirement is just give it some time to settle out. Give yourself some time to decide what you want to do. Don't go after the first thing that comes at you. And I think that ability to take a step back and just think about how you want to spend your time going forward is worth a lot.
You sit on a number of boards, Bill. How have sitting on boards of directors played into your retirement?
Well, I think it was a great transition for me, Gary. As you know, I was on several corporate boards for a long time, and so it kind of softens the blow of not having a day job when you've got that to kind of serve as a transition. And so my time on the corporate boards and even the private boards that I was serving on when I did retire gave me kind of a soft landing.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned corporate boards, private boards. You also sit on U.S. Postal. How has your role as a director kind of change or vary depending on the type of company structure?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's really very organizational specific would be the way I would describe that. Being on the Cerner board with you is certainly very different than being a small startup private company board member, and then very different from being a member of the board of governors of the Postal Service. So it really does depend a lot on the type of organization. Just to give you kind of an example, public company boards are very straightforward in terms of the rules and regulations and responsibilities and the things that you really need to focus on. And obviously, the number one focus is the shareholder. When you're on a board like the Postal Service board, there are political implications for everything you do because the board is really serving both political parties and has oversight from Congress as well as oversight from the administration. So the decisions you make are impacted by more constituencies than they would be on a public company board. So there are some very organization specific attributes to being a director of different organizations.
What do you think are the top characteristics, most important characteristics of a top-notch board member, Bill?
Well, I think there are a couple things I always ask myself, Gary. The first is, can I make a contribution? And the second is, can I learn? And so I think you really need to ask yourself those two questions before you join a board. Obviously, your skills add to boards in a very unique way. So, for example, on a logistics company board, my background in logistics is very helpful, and it has been for the Postal Service board. Some boards need more financial orientation. Some boards need directors with some experience running big organizations. So, your different skill set it really varies depending on the board you're joining and what what they're in need of as an organization. I think the kind of consistent qualities that are required is you have to really be able to engage. You don't want board members that aren't engaged. I think a high level of integrity is really important. And the ability to work well with teams is important. Boards are teams, as you know, and so some people work better with teams than others. So I think your experience working within teams and leading teams is also a really important attribute to have for any director.
So you've been the chairman of several boards, certainly the chair of the Cerner board. What does it take to be a good chairman, Bill?
Well, it kind of goes back to what I just said. The ability to lead teams and work effectively within a team, I think, is really important. Interpersonal skills are really important for a chairman, and I think also the importance of being able to separate your role from the role of a CEO and the role of other board members is also important. So those lines have to be respected, and you have to feel like there's accountability in the chairman's role because there is.
Yeah. You were the chair of the Cerner board during the acquisition by Oracle, $30 billion acquisition. So it was pretty important acquisition for both sides, both Cerner shareholders and the Oracle shareholders. What special responsibilities did you have as the chair to guide that acquisition process, Bill?
Well, as you know, we had a special committee set up to really be the interface between Oracle and Cerner. And as the chair, I'm responsible for leading that special committee. So the first thing that needs to be done is to make sure you understand how the board feels about the acquisition and what the requirements are going to be to make it a successful acquisition. So spend some time trying to make sure the board is in alignment, and then you make sure that you're able to communicate that set of priorities to the Oracle team. And so that was really the primary focus. It's an iterative process, so it's not a one-time deal. They're back and forth between the acquirer and the other company that really has to happen in a timely way, and it has to happen in a way that reflects the desires of in our case, Cerner. So it's a leadership role of a different kind, with kind of the bottom line being you've got to keep in the front of your mind that the shareholders of Cerner are really who you're working for in that kind of a situation.
If there were just one or two key issues that had to be addressed during this whole acquisition process, what were they? Just in thinking about what are just sequencing, what were the one or two things that just had to happen well in order to get this deal done?
Well, I think there are a couple things I've learned from previous acquisitions. One is that there's no substitute for clarity. You've got to make sure that you're not talking past each other. So the specificity of what you talk about is extremely important, so the other side doesn't come away with a misconception. And that's probably the number one thing, is just clarity. Along with that, I think the other side needs to know kind of what your walk-away issues are, because it doesn't do either side much good to be talking about a deal that's never going to happen. So, that speaks to the clarity, and it also speaks to understanding what your company is going to require to make the deal come through.
Bill, thanks a lot. Terrific interview, as we expected it would be, and we appreciate your time today.
It's my pleasure, Gary. Thank you.